Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. My name is Jamie Hurd, and I'm a project manager with the Office of School Modernization. Some of you might know me. I worked on the grant modernization for a few years. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to provide an overview and an update to the improvements proposed for Grants Upperfield. We'll be talking about the current scope, design updates, next steps, and opportunities for community feedback and input. Many of you are familiar with this project. It's not a new conversation for the grant community. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the PPS YouTube channel, so the same channel that you're watching it on now. We don't have the capacity right now to address questions and answers during the presentation, but you will see an email address at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to email us your questions and comments, and we will respond. Additionally, at the end of the presentation, we'll be providing detailed information about how you can provide input through the city's land use review process. So before we start the presentation, I would like to introduce the team that is here with me today.
Hi, I'm Debbie Engelstad. I am a teacher and a coach for the last 33 years at Grant High School. I'm currently the softball coach.
Hi, I am Stephen Weeks, design principal at Bora Architects, leading our team in this design effort.
Hi, I'm Kate Firetag, also with Bora Architects, and I'm the project manager on this project.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Kohler. I'm a partner with Cameron McCarthy, and I am the sports field design specialist.
And my name is Brett Horner. I'm with Portland Parks and Recreation, representing the Parks Bureau and the adjacent park to the school.
Hello, I'm David Main. I'm the communications manager for the bond program.
I'm going to start the presentation.
Was I muted, Jamie?
Yes, you are. Do you want to introduce yourself again?
Yeah, I'm Darren Lee. I'm the director of construction for the 2017 bond program. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you,
Google
everyone.
technical.
It's the age we live in. So as I said, this is a presentation on the Grant Upperfield improvements. This is our agenda. We expect the meeting to be about 45 minutes long. We'll do our best to keep it within that time frame. This presentation will also be posted to the Grant Upperfield website on the PPS website. So again, for those of you that might miss it or have friends that want to review the presentation, it'll be there for your viewing. So a little bit of the project history. Again, I know a lot of you are very familiar with this. I like to start with this picture. This was obviously during the modernization, and you can see that Grant softball team had been using the Grant Bowl for practice and for games. And I think it was pretty exciting because it was really the first time that they were able to play as a team at Grant Park and be so close to the school, even though the school was, at the moment at Marshall. And this worked for a few reasons, mostly because track and field was not there. There's a lot of competing interest, but what it did is it really started a conversation about how we get softball back to Grant Park and playing at their home, which is Grant High School. So a kind of a short synopsis. Again, this project and Grant Bowl and Grant Fields has a long history as does softball. I know Deb has been participating in this conversation for probably upwards of 30 years. But kind of in the last 5 years, just a snapshot of how we got to where we are. Back in 2015, as we were doing the master planning for Grant modernization, we had located softball in the north field, which is also known as Holyrood Field. It's also known as the dog park. And it was in the project for some time. I think through kind of just standard design progression and learning more, we realized both that there was a number of incompatible uses in that location, and it was a very constrained site where what we were doing was we were starting to design a softball field that was going to be very tight. We weren't going to have the right allowances between things. So it was removed from the grant modernization. And we started a process of trying to figure out how to get softball back to grant. So we worked with Deb and Carol Campbell and people from the community and the Board of Education for a while, about a year or so, and developed a proposal to look at 4 options for grant softball. In 2018, the board directed Office of School Modernization to proceed with the master planning process, locating softball in the Grant Bowl. This was to include, a full upgrade to Grant Bowl so that all teams could play there. Because as of now, football, soccer, nobody really plays home games because we don't have bleachers, we don't have lights. So last year, and I'm sure a number of you were at these meetings, we started a master planning process. And during that process, we had our design advisory group. We also had a number of community meetings, and the conversation really led to 2 schemes to get softball back at Grant Park. One scheme was the base master plan, we called it, and that had softball in the bowl. It also required some moving around for soccer and football, and it was pretty tight and required a lot of work to get track to operate at that same time. Concurrently, we developed an alternate master plan, which located softball in the upper field and left the bowl intact, and we did identify future upgrades for the bowl. After submitting this to the Board of Education, we were directed to proceed with the alternate master plan and phase 1, which was placing softball in the upper field. And so here in 2020, that's how we came to this, to where we are now. And so I'm going to turn it over to Deb to talk a little bit about field use and practice times, and then we'll look at the design.
Thank you, Jamie. And thank you for your time tonight. It's been a long process. Jamie was right. It's been, I guess I can say decades now that we've been working on this, and we're trying to make this a reality for our community as well as our school. So a couple things about the practice time. As you can see the slide up there. One of the things that all of our kids end up having to do is miss school. That's a big deal for our teachers as well as our student athletes. And, in missing school, a lot of the kids have actually come out of being able to play. Parents have taken them out of being able to play on our teams because they're missing too much school. The time they have to get out to travel to fields to play, since we can't play at Grant. So this would obviously take care of that problem, and that would be huge for us. Usually in the fall, we've got, as you can see, men's soccer and women's soccer. This would allow our men and women's program, if we were able to do this up on that upper field, it would allow at least both varsity teams to practice in a staggered situation where school gets out for us at 3:30. If you were to start practices at 4 for the women's team, and they could practice one of their teams or maybe 2 of their teams, or possibly 3 of their teams, depending on what they wanted to do, for 2.5 hours, and then the men's program potentially then could come in after that and practice, taking our time probably till 9 o'clock or so. I see lights being a huge issue in the fall, in particular when we lose that daylight. So, but this would not only allow us to use that upper field for practices and staggered practices, but also possibly having a dual situation where you have a men's soccer game and a women's soccer game. It helps, again, supporting that whole community and each other's programs. And then it would allow our football team then to have the use of the football field to actually practice on a full field. As it is right now, we are able to, the football team gets half of the football field, and then the soccer team takes over the other half of the football field. So there's not a real time. I mean, our kids really lose out on the, being able to actually practice on full-size fields because we're always sharing everything. So this would allow us to be able to do that. In the winter, not so much going on. I think that would be one of the times where there's not, a big use of field time. But then we come to the spring, and in the spring, it's crazy out there. There's all kinds of things going on. There's youth track, and there's our high school track, and there's softball, and there's baseball. And in all my years until we moved to Marshall and our track wasn't being used by the track program, that was the only time that my program has ever been on campus. We have always been up at Wilshire Park, and both of my teams have been up there. We've always left school early. And so when we had the opportunity, I wanted to bring my kids back into the community, and the bowl was available. And so we used that. But I can tell you, using it during that time, it wasn't just me. It was Frisbee, it was soccer practices for other people. So the whole community was out there. If we're able to get what we need done on that upper field, we're going to then be able to do the same things that they can do in the fall, that we can have practices that actually are full practices on the entire field. So if the boys were practicing baseball, they could have the entire field for their 2.5 hours, and then the ladies could come on and we could use our field for 2.5 hours. I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, it would just be so awesome to play a back-to-back game one evening where the girls and the boys were actually able to play back-to-back at the varsity level potentially, or even our JV programs. It would just open up so many things for our kids to be able to use that space and not have to leave campus. That's huge. Not have to get out of school early and miss school. So it's huge for us. What else? I took a few notes here. We also have lacrosse in the spring, so it'd be wonderful to be able to allow them, if all the baseball and softball were out of there for the day, to allow that program actually to have some space to do some things on. I mean, this is all about building community and supporting each other's programs, and making that whole brand new building feel whole, where as many programs that can play on campus could play on campus. And I just think it's really important that we do what we can to create that atmosphere for our students.
Thank you, Deb, and thanks, Jamie, for outlining the steps along the way that have led to this point. Before we get into the current design, I wanted to share a little bit about the master planning process that we went through. During that, the design team identified, as Jamie mentioned, this opportunity to accommodate the softball field at the upper field instead of down in the bowl. And that had some advantages. We shared that idea with coaches and athletic directors and the community who was at our public meetings. I'm sure many of you were there. And the feedback we received was clearly favored this approach. So that's what led to the development of what we call the alternate master plan, as Jamie mentioned. If you go to the next slide, we can see that plan. And based on uncertainty of funding for all the work at the Grant Bowl and the urgent desire to have softball on campus, it made a lot of sense to divide the project into 2 phases. And phase 1 is the project that we're proceeding with now. It's limited to improvements at the upper field only, doesn't include any work in the bowl. The improvements that might come for the bowl in the future, like seating or restrooms, that's what we call phase 2. And that is a project with no current timeline and no current funding. But we're optimistic that someday improvements there could make the entire campus whole for Grant High School athletics. Important to note that field lighting is a necessary component for each phase in order to extend the hours of use, as Deb described, to accommodate practice and game schedules in the late afternoon and evening time. You can see in this drawing the new baseball field that was completed last year as part of the Grant modernization. And you can also see that we've added to that field a new softball field in the southeast corner. It's just west of the gym that you can see in the drawing. The softball field is opposite the baseball field. It overlaps the outfield, obviously, so each team couldn't practice simultaneously because of that conflict. But some limited infield activity might be able to happen at the same time. by circumstance of history, there's something interesting about this property too that I wanted to point out. There's a property line that actually divides it because the field is located on two separate parcels of land that are owned by two separate entities. So PPS owns the land to the east of that property line, which roughly corresponds to what would be Northeast 35th Avenue. That would divide the site if it had gone through. And the western side of that property line is Parks space. So the field belongs literally both to the school and to the community and is operated under a collaboration agreement between PPS and Portland Parks and Rec. And this adds a little bit of complexity to the development process because we have two owners and in fact, two separate distinct zoning designations for this property. Of course, this is not news. It's been like this forever, but it is important for everyone to understand that reality. And it does form also the basis for our shared commitment to developing this project here to reflect the entire community's desires. Next slide, Jamie. So through that master planning process, at public meetings, open houses, and even at the board meeting, the community expressed support for the project. But we also heard some voices of concern and some issues that are important to be addressed in the project. Some of those concern the potential impacts from traffic, noise from audio systems can be a challenge, lighting that brings increased use and activity of the field is a concern, fencing encroaching a little bit closer to US Grant Place has been identified. Some of these issues are based in field operation and schedules, and they're not really design problems to solve. These things, like hours of use, for example, would best be addressed through the collaboration agreement process that Brett is going to talk about in a few minutes. Other items can be addressed through design. And as we're moving through that process now, we're keeping these concerns in mind to identify potential solutions that could mitigate their impacts. So to talk a little bit more about our current design, I'm going to turn this over to Matt Kohler from Cameron McCarthy.
Stephen, I have a quick question. Sorry, I was muted. I know when we first put the grant field in, there was issues with foul ball type netting. And I think FAM right now is facilities maintenance is trying to address that deficiency for foul ball type netting. Is there any concern with that with softball for this?
It's part of the conversation, and I think it's something that we want to look at including in the project and working with FAM so that we can kind of join forces on that. But I think it is a big consideration.
Yeah, maybe share some costs there.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So yes, as we move into a little more of a zoom in look at the upper field components and part of the initial phase one process, there are kind of a list of items that we're wanting to make sure we check off and to make sure that we're meeting for this facility to create parity and equity between the softball and football facility that will be, or softball and baseball facility that will be sharing this field along with soccer. So a few of those notes and items are on the screen for you. So a competition softball field that, again, is equal to the baseball field. It would need to meet all OSAA guidelines for dimensions and safety. We would want to have appropriate backstop fencing and the needed bullpen area for warm-up, for pitcher warm-up, permanent dugouts that would match the existing baseball facility dugouts, providing spectator seating for approximately 140 spectators, And then also the use of portable fences to provide outfield fencing components for both baseball and softball. Along with that, there's an existing scoreboard for the baseball facility, but we would need to provide a similar scoreboard for the softball facility and for its use. And then has been noted by both Jamie and Stephen the need for lights, and Deb as well, the need for lights to allow this facility to meet its expectations are important for all the student athletes that can and will use this facility. Jamie, if you want to move to the next slide. So this kind of zoom in is starting to look at the area that we're planning to impact on the site. So if you see the dashed red line on the plan, that is showcasing the area of site impact to allow us to install a softball facility and to improve the soccer facility that's at this location. So within that area, we would be creating a new backstop, new bleacher location, new dugouts, lighting, a bullpen, and an expansion of the turf to allow a bit more run out space for soccer. The images on the right showcase what is existing at the baseball facility and what we would be looking to match or closely match for the softball facility. Jamie, if you want to go to the next slide, please. And as we move into this, I'll also note that there will be, I think one previous. There we go. Thank you. As we go into this, I'll say there will also be some additional line work created for the fields to allow them to be more fully playable. But part of this is also looking at how we can locate scoreboard and or relocate one existing scoreboard potentially to allow for better visibility by spectators and athletes while minimizing impact to the neighboring properties and the views from the neighboring houses. As you see the number 1 noted on the plan on the southern end, that is the existing baseball scoreboard that you see in the picture on the right. It's hidden from street view by some existing, an existing grove of trees. However, it may now be partially blocked by the new backstop that goes in for softball. So if we end up having some visual issues for spectators from baseball, we would look to move the scoreboard from location 1 to location 3. So as you can see, further away from the street and facing into the facility and not out. And then location 2 is noting where we would propose to install a softball scoreboard that would allow for full spectator view while also keeping it within the facility grounds as much as possible. Next slide starts to focus on our lighting location opportunities. And lights are important, and they're always a question for everyone when looking at these facilities. And I will note that there's a good reason for that. That bottom right-hand corner image is what many of us remember 25, 30 years ago, of these glowing candles that seem to spill light everywhere. And that has really changed dramatically. The upper right picture is what we are proposing, which is new LED lighting. It's energy efficient, it is night sky compliant, and it cuts light spill completely. So what it is meant to do is shine on the athletic facility and not anywhere else. It's very directed. You can see that you don't see the light bulbs, and the goal is to shine directly on the facility and not create light pollution to adjacent neighbors and properties. There's 7 lights shown here with the blue ovals, and this will allow a fully lit and safe field for the kids and the student athletes that are playing here, and allow for security issues when those types of games are occurring. The next slide starts to look at how we're seeing this facility from the street and from the neighborhood. And the idea and the goal of this project has the turf expanding to the south some to allow for that extended playing area, and also is including that that creation of the backstop and seating areas and dugouts for softball. We're very fortunate that in those pictures on the right, there are, I'm calling them new existing trees because they're existing, but very short time existing. They were installed as part of the grant expansion and modernization project. And those current locations are actually in a wonderful spot for creating a filtered view into the site in the future. Where those trees are located, I have sketched some kind of red outlines that show how those trees will probably look in the next few years, say 4 to 5 years from now. And you can see that they will create a wonderful kind of visual buffer from those adjacent properties, while also keeping the ground plane open for security purposes. We want to be able to see in and out of the facility from the sidewalk that's right there for safety and security. But what we want to do is create a nice filtered view for those neighboring properties. I think with that, that pretty much describes most of the impact that we're looking at. So I would love to pass it to Brett from Portland Parks and Recreation.
Thanks, Matt. And again, we're excited about this project. It's been several years in the works, and you know, as Stephen mentioned earlier, it's an odd property arrangement with the property line kind of going through the center of this new baseball and soon to be softball field. So we see a lot of benefit in the project. We're partnering with Portland Public Schools. Most of the funding for the project is coming from Portland Public Schools. Our bureau is contributing a little bit in terms of our staff time to work on the project. So we are, you know, financially we are committing to the project. We do want to hear from the community, and we've been tracking, you know, what we've been hearing in the public meetings and at the school board meeting. And we're happy to answer questions that are specific to parks that you may have, and we can follow up and get answers back to you. There is a collaborative agreement for virtually every school and park in the city with Portland Public Schools. And it's a master agreement that covers all of this, many of the sites, almost all the sites within the boundaries of Portland Public School District. So we have a lot of these, and generally how it works is the school gets priority use of parks, even if they're not adjacent to the school. If they're, you know, if you're traveling to, say, Wilshire Park, like the girls softball team has to currently, there's some priority use for the school to use those during certain hours. And generally that's during the school year. It's in the afternoon from 3 to 6. The Portland Public Schools programs have priority use. There are some, I would say, one-off agreements on some sites. They're specific to certain sites. This may be an indication that this may be a site where we want to customize the hours. And so we have been talking with Portland Public Schools about how the use hours would be allocated. Obviously, since the school district is providing the bulk of the funding, we are looking at obviously expanded hours for the school to do sports programming in the evenings when the lights are on. But there will also be hours for the public and for the community and the neighborhood, which we feel is a benefit. It's an excellent all-weather, you know, field, so you can use it during our rainy season and the cold season, and so we see a lot of benefit. There is a very significant lack of sports field hours of play availability citywide. It's not just here, it's across the city. There are not enough fields for the demand that we have for sports use. And so we see this as an opportunity to help meet that demand, not only for sports groups and not only for the high school, but also for the neighborhood and the community. So you will be seeing some more specific information about the hours of use as we get further along, as parks and Portland Public Schools get further along in the negotiations on the hours of use, including how late you know, the lights stay on. We want to hear from you, your thoughts on that. You know, we looked at other high schools that have night lighting, how late those stay on or when those go off. particularly the ones that have, immediate neighbors right adjacent to them, like Cleveland and other high schools. So, but we're happy to hear community input on hours of use, and happy to answer questions about how the field time will be allocated, and be able to get back to you. The hours of use and the hours that the lights will be on is likely to be set in the land use process. So it's not like Portland Public Schools and Portland Parks are going to go off and cook something up and not involve, neighborhood input on the hours of the lights and the hours of use. We will be listening to your input on this. The hearings officer, which approves the land use application or modifies it or denies it, will have a say, and he will hear all the testimony and the concerns and make a determination. So we're excited about the project. We're happy to partner with Portland Public Schools. They've been a great partner. I worked on the Grant High modernization project, so I'm very familiar with the site, and we're just happy to answer any questions that you may have. And so with that, I will turn things over to Kate.
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about the schedule and the land use process. So currently we are in the design phase of the project. We're going to be finishing up this current design development phase next month and start heading into the land use process in early November. We will have another design advisory group meeting next week on October 8th. And we are targeting a land use hearing in late January, and we'll have another design advisory group meeting after that, when construction documents phase of the project starts. And so this schedule is all targeting construction during the dry months next summer and hoping for completion next fall. But the schedule is contingent upon city processes of land use and permitting, which we don't have control over. But we think that we have some good estimates in the schedule. So targeting trying to finish the project, finish construction in 2021. So the next slide. We also wanted to go over the land use process a little bit more detail with you, because this is the mechanism for public involvement that protects public interests. So basically for the process, we submit our proposal and they make sure that we have all the information that they need to evaluate it. And it's circulated among city agencies such as PBOT, Urban Forestry, Bureau of Environmental Services, and all these agencies provide input on the project. The site will get signs posted showing that there's going to be a land use hearing. Postcards will be sent out to neighbors, also alerting everyone of the hearing. PPS and Portland Parks will also sort of alert everybody. So there'll be good advertisement for when that hearing will be. City staff are going to write the report and findings on the project, and then we will have a hearing. And the land use commissioner will be looking at particular approval criteria. So they're going to be looking at the character and impacts to that character of the project. For instance, are there any mature trees that will be removed? In this case, there are not. Is the use consistent with the existing use on site? Things like that, just to make sure that the character of what is there is maintained. Public services will be evaluated, whether or not there are transportation issues, do they need to be mitigated? They look at stormwater management, is the plan acceptable? They also look at livability issues, such as noise and glare. I know that those are big ones for the neighbors. and they're going to look to see whether these impacts are mitigated. And lastly, they're going to look to make sure that the project is consistent with the overall comprehensive plan for the whole city. Next slide. So this is a public process that engages public agencies, but also engages citizens. So you are invited to provide testimony at or before the hearing. And the testimony can be written or oral. They're going to hear all the testimony in favor together and all the testimony in opposition together. And they also ask that all testimony be limited to the approval criteria. So you want to sort of target your testimony to the items that the decisions will be made upon. And when providing the testimony as a group, they ask that the sentiment of the group not be repeated by various members, but rather that one person speaks for an entire group, or that each group member presents a separate idea. And we want to emphasize that this land use process is the mechanism that casts the largest net for making sure that all stakeholders are heard. And so we really want to invite you to participate. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to Jamie.
Thank you, Kate. And I really want to thank the project team. There was a lot of work that went into developing this presentation, and we hope it was very useful and informative. You know, we are strong supporters of the land use process. We believe that it's very inclusive, and that's the best way to build community resources, which is what we want to do. So in addition to, you know, Kate mentioned the postcards will be required to send out, that will be posting around the site. We will also use, you know, our PPS methods of text and email. We also have a website on the PPS, or page on the PPS website dedicated to this project. You can always look there for additional information, and we will certainly be posting aspects of the land use testimony on that site. So we're looking forward to working with everybody to develop the best project possible for the community. And we really appreciate your time tonight. And as I said, this will be available on the PPS YouTube channel for future showings. So thank you. And thank you to the team. Thank you to the community. And I think that's a wrap.